Welcome, thrice welcome to JWC Livestream. That's Joe's Writers Club Livestream, folks. And today's episode is Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky. My name is Ricky, or that's what they tell me. And David, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Well, welcome, sir. Welcome. I must say I've been so busy with everything. It's been a while with poetry. I have and I have a poem to write too. So the poetic muse is there. It's just life is such a hurricane. How do you make time for poetry, David? Have you ever considered that sort of equation in the matter, for our fellow creatives?
Oh, well, I do have some advice that I could impart to people who find if they're working a job and their primary job isn't in education or teaching creative writing, that there are countless moments and hours in the day, actually, in which we engage in activities outside of our work to pass the time. And we can eliminate a lot of those, such as social media, watching videos. Um, there is time enough in each day to be able to write a poem and still do the other tasks that you want. So it's a matter of disciplining yourself and reminding yourself if it's a priority to create, then the moment you have a free moment outside of work, that think of it as a disposable income that you are spending on your creative um, project. So by all means, rather than going home and watching a television show or watching a video on YouTube or what have you, you can spend that time writing that poem or that short story or that novel. It doesn't take very long. It takes, for someone who wants to write a novel, I would say it takes a couple of hours out of each of your day that you can produce up to 1,000 or 2,000 words. So it's very possible. It's very feasible. So it's about having a disciplined sort of schedule and a space in which you can do your creativity. So there's no magic trick to it.
That's helpful advice from those of us who are disciplined. For those of us who are not, I would say you could achieve the same thing through obsession, basically writing every chance you get. Some people are schedule based and can adhere to it. So you got to find out what kind of person you are. So that's the thing, folks. But David's right. Take time out of your day, put Facebook down for 10 minutes or preferably longer, and write a poem instead. Don't watch as much YouTube. Like, delete 1 hour of YouTube and devote it to writing. That makes all the difference to whether you can fit a poem in your day. And you might write something timeless that inspires people for many, many hundreds of years in that moment. So that's how you have to think about it. You have to think about it in the timelessness, in the transcendent mode. Well, that's great. Thank you for that. Now, how about you creatively? Have you been writing anything? Like what projects are you working on, David?
Oh, yes. Well, right now I'm finishing up a novel with the host of tonight's podcast, and it's called Athenaeum, and I'm drafting a new novel called Billy. So I've been very busy doing that, essay writing, and reading a lot too. I think it's really important that writers, and Stephen King even talks about this, that you can't really call yourself a writer unless you also read. So I think it's really important that you make it a part of your day, a daily part of your life. That a chapter here, an article there. Don't assume that you can just coast on your own inspirations. The purpose of reading and reading as much as you can is that it gives you stylistically a kind of a training. You can see how people before you have come and how they did it, and it can give you ideas about how you want to express what you're trying to create. So definitely reading is part of any serious writer's life too. So
Without question,
yeah.
yes. There's all these questions online all the time about writer's block. It's like reading is like the first thing that comes to mind to combat writer's block is reading, then music, then like go for a walk, then watch a stimulating movie, you know. And by the time, if you don't find inspiration in some of that, then I don't know what to say. All right, well, point being though, besides all this wonderful advice, is you got a lot of irons in the fire. You're doing a lot of creativity, and that's the key, folks. Always have some project to reach for when inspiration strikes, when the muse comes calling. If you have a bunch of projects laying around in an orderly state, then you could pick them up at will, and it becomes the old any port in the storm for the muse. That's why I'll go over what I'm doing. We merged the narratives for the Athenaeum project, basically got everything together and put it into a prototype chapter order, which is for me always a very exciting phase of a book. It's a collaboration between me and David, or David and I should say. And so we were all writing, and our stuff was in different places to keep it organized. And we have a preliminary chapter order. And between that and the fact that the book's almost finished, it was an exciting weekend with regards to that, because we're gonna edit soon. We're gonna listen through it and see what we wrote, like what's up. And I already was into some chapters, and it's already very exciting. I'm right.
Interesting. If you don't mind me breaking in, I
No,
would
by all
like to
means.
encourage people to, and yourself, Ricky, to do a podcast on bookcraft, because this is the first time I ever sat through that kind of experience, and it was very. This is where an outline is indispensable. You cannot. There's no way to do it other than with an outline. And the process that
Yep.
you and I went through yesterday over the phone, it was very illuminating. So I actually enjoyed it.
Very good. Glad to hear, because it is laborious to move all these things around, because you have to be very, very careful about where you're placing them, because you're dealing with a lot of text. I mean, we were throwing around like 50,000 words yesterday, moving it around, shifting. And you want to make sure it goes in the right place so that it can lily pad and hop from one document to the other. Everybody has their own process, I'm sure. It's just I have a certain level of order I like to maintain when it comes to this. And based on what I can see, it was successful, because everything is where it's supposed to be. So, and it was thrilling. It was thrilling to do, and it was wonderful to see it all materialize the way that it did. And now comes the going through the document and stuff. So that should also be cool. We've had some bookcraft shows before. Generally, the last week of the month is a bookcraft show, and we have went over some things. But typically, like I haven't collaborated with Tom the way I've collaborated with you. Like sharing outlines in order to maintain that order and then create the book. It's like we haven't gotten to that level. So I'm not so sure how that would go. Like maybe you and I could do that at some point, because
I would be delighted to. My expertise on the subject is very limited. I have exactly one experience in which I've done this, so it would be heavily. I would just be following suit. But think it's an opportunity to encourage collaboration too. When all of these steps that a, a pair of writers or a team of writers would go through in the process of creating a readable first draft, that I would recommend that I encourage people to try and do collaboration. I really do think that it's about, it's actually, in a way, it's almost pure than just creating a work by oneself, because it's putting one's ego aside for the benefit of the work itself when you have to work with other creatives. So I highly recommend that everyone try it if they get an opportunity.
David's truth is laser guided concerning this matter, because I've worked with several collaborations and they don't always bear fruit, because there is a requirement of ego death. I'm not talking about like rolling over and giving belly, but I am saying that there's a lot of, because different people have different processes and there's different levels of tolerance. There's external stress, professional stress, and all those things have an effect on the overall mood. But there's, besides all that combat that I just mentioned, there's rewards, there's extensive rewards, and there's opportunities to learn and try out new things. And just the dialogue between people about writing is a treasure, because I get to hear from David how he and his muse interface and how he writes, and then he gets to hear how I write. We go back and forth about those matters, and it's like there's a lot of internal diagnostic and illumination that arises from this interaction. So I would second what David says any day of the week, and said it well as well. And that's the whole thing. I could probably scrape up that outline section, like the carcass of it. I could probably scrape it up and design a show out of it, which would show the stages. Because I built the outline for Merger. I built that in stages. So I could just do that, and then we could do a bookcraft show one day. I don't see why not. Because it was a blast. I mean, it's a little laborious moving stuff, like cutting all those documents up and whatever. It's a little laborious, but when it's done, it's wonderful. I mean, because you see this beautiful thing. And it's just another step getting the book closer to where it needs to be, getting it ready for print. So it is very exciting and rewarding. The other projects, just to real quick, yippee skip, tie it up. I'm working on this thing called Z Nowhere, which is an experimental novella. There'll be 2 of those novellas in one collection. Right now, it's tentatively called Exotic Hypocaust. A hypocaust is the device used to heat the Roman baths back during the Roman Empire. So I want to tell 2 different novellas on the same mining asteroid, basically. And I got a chapter and a quarter of Z Nowhere. I'm been busy. I'm looking forward to circling back. And I'm writing this other thing called Journey to the Mountain. And I have almost 3 chapters of that, which is reaching towards 10,000 words at that point, because these chapters, I'm experimenting, doing them a little bulky. And Journey to the Mountain is a story about my creative life, like the creative side of my life. And it deals with very little else. Only in the beginning does it, because there's a time where poetry was just a thing to do on a Saturday afternoon at your aunt's house, or as an assignment from school. You have to fall in love with poetry at some point to really start writing it regularly and working in poesy. And so it's like I want to tell the story about how all that stuff happened, leading into this marvelous finish with a fictional, or theoretical, I should say, Mount Timeless. So between all that stuff and poesy, and because like I said, I gotta write that poem now that I have a breath of time. But it's been great. Creativity's been fantastic. So now that that's wrapped up, our creative intro, and you guys, you see that we're writing, we have projects, multiple projects, all this stuff's going on, and we're still doing podcasts because we want to inspire you. And today's show, being that it's Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky, we read a poem, and then we talk about the poem and the poet, and then there's hopefully some sort of tangent of wisdom at the end. It's a nice little thing. So today we are reading a poem by Yusuf Komunyakaa. Is that how you say his name? I don't want to be insulting.
Komunyakaa.
Komunyakaa.
Yes.
All right. Apologize for that. I'm not good at pronouncing, but we'll do our best. That's all we can do. So this poem is called Crossing a City Highway. The city at 3 a.m. is an ungodly mask that approaching day hides behind. And from the coyote nosing forth the muscles of something ahead. And a fiery blaze of 18-wheelers zoom out of the curved night trees along the rim of absolute chance. A question hangs in the oily air. She knows he will follow her scent, left in the poisoned grass and buzz of chainsaws, if he can unweave a circle of traps around the subdivision. For a breathing moment, she stops on the world's edge, and then, quick as that, masters the stars and again slips the noose and darts straight between sedans and SUVs. Don't try to hide from her kind of blues, or the dead nomads who walked trails now paved by wanderlust, an epoch somewhere between tamed and wild. If it were Monday instead of Sunday, the outcome may be different, but she's now in Central Park, searching for a Seneca village among painted stones and shrubs where she's never been. And lucky she hasn't forgotten how to jig and kill her way home. So again, that was Crossing a City Highway by Yusuf Komunyakaa. And yes. We have a beautiful situation presented to us. There's a whole underworld of territory. The city at 3 a.m. is an ungodly mask the approaching day hides behind. And from the coyote nosing forth the muscles of something ahead. So that's just fantastic. I mean, the idea, I almost see like the cityscape as it's like he's saying, it's an ungodly mask the approaching day hides behind. So there's a closure of identity. And then we have this coyote, this specter. So there's a city and there's a coyote. So the coyote is, one might say, interloping, but I don't think that that's what this poet means. It's almost like maybe the city is interloping on the coyote, because and a fiery blaze of 18-wheelers zoom out of the curved night trees, and along the rim of absolute chance, a question hangs in the oily air. So noise pollution, the air is oily. She knows he will follow her scent, left in the poison grass and buzz of chainsaws, if he can unweave a circle of traps around the subdivision. So there's a she and a he, that all this labyrinth of city and poison grass and chainsaw leavings, so they are separated by this labyrinth of modernity and urbanism. For a breathy moment, she stops on the world's edge, and then quick as that, masters the stars and again slips the noose and dart straight between sedans and SUVs. So they didn't catch her. She's free. She was not discovered, and she's moving freely despite all this industrial humanity clustered around. Don't try to hide from her kind of blues or the dead nomads who walk trails now paved by wanderlust, an epoch somewhere between tamed and wild. So dead nomads, these are phantoms of different folk who he's transposing upon the coyote, because it's also wandering, it's also nomadic, because it's clearly not welcome. It won't be welcome in the city, I can't imagine. So it's hiding. If it were Monday instead of Sunday, the outcome may be different, but she's now in Central Park searching for a Seneca village. And that Seneca village is a very interesting thing. Seneca Village was a 19th century settlement of mostly African-American landowners in the borough of Manhattan in New York City, within what would become present-day Central Park. The settlement was located near the current Upper West Side neighborhood, approximately bound by Central Park West, and the axes of 82nd Street and 89th Street and 7th Avenue, had they been constructed through the park. Seneca Village was founded in 1825 by free Black Americans, the first such community in the city, although under Dutch rule, there was a half-free community of African-owned farms north of New Amsterdam, which was New York, became New York. At its peak, the community had approximately 225 residents, 3 churches, 2 schools, and 3 cemeteries. The settlement was later also inhabited by Irish and German immigrants. Seneca Village existed until 1857, when through eminent domain, the villagers and other settlers in the area were forced to leave, and their houses were torn down for the construction of Central Park. The entirety of the village was dispersed. So there's that eminent domain, folks. So circling back, but she's now in Central Park searching for Seneca Village. So again, with that information, we see what's being conveyed. Seneca Village was there before Central Park. It's the beforeness that we're concerning ourselves with. Nature as an absolute beforeness, Aboriginal culture as a beforeness. And now we have this lattice of modernity, like a cage over the top of it. Among painted stones and shrubs where she's never been, and lucky she hasn't forgotten how to jig and kill her way home. So she's got to be quick on her feet, and she's got to be savage in order to come to and fro from this place. The Central Park Seneca Village thing is very, very fascinating as far as I'm concerned. And I thought it to be an excellent poem. David, what did you think of this poem?
I'm familiar with the poem. The first time I read this was 2 years ago. I did a Twitter Spaces on it, and I researched the terms in it, and I found it to be very close to. We're seeing the world through the eyes of this particular coyote, and there are themes of nature versus man that occur in the poem. The artificial nature of the cityscape as opposed to a landscape, appropriated land from a life that had lived on that land beforehand, such as the coyote, or in the case of Seneca Village, the settlers who lived in that community, freed slaves that lost their land after eminent domain, after the land was taken up and bought.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of really, it's a very tightly packed poem metaphorically, and it's very rich essentially. So you can get this I mean, the lines such as the nosing forth muscles of something ahead, a fiery blaze of 18-wheelers zoom out of the curved night trees. Along the rim of absolute chance, a question hangs in the oily air. The Yusef Komunyakaa really brings the reader in there down to ground level, and you can smell the oily air. You can hear the trucks zooming past, and the risk that this coyote is taking in crossing this highway into the city. And it's a quite breathtaking poem.
Agreed. Enjoyable. It makes me want to go out and, I mean, if nothing else, this show makes me just compose a list of poets I have to acquire, and inspires besides. It's been a very, very wonderful thing doing this show, these many episodes. Well, now that we've went over the poem and did our analysis, which I think was pretty cool. Now we do a segment where we separate the poem from the poet. Now, some people don't have much care for the poet. Some people just read the poems. There are other people who enjoy the documentaries and history or biographies of the poets as much as the poems themselves, because poets tend to lead pretty interesting lives, even if they're not recognized. So Yusef Komunyakaa, born James William Brown in 1941, is an American poet who teaches at New York University and is a member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers. Komunyakaa is a recipient of the 1994 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award for Neon Vernacular and the 1994 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. He also received the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize. Komunyakaa received the 2007 Louisiana Writer Award for his enduring contribution to poetry. According to public records, Komunyakaa was born in 1947, and the given name James William Brown. His former wife said in her memoir he was born in 1941. He was the eldest of 5 children of James William Brown, a carpenter, and his wife. He grew up in a small town of Bogalusa, Louisiana, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, hopefully. As an adult, he would claim the name Komunyakaa, said to be his grandfather's African name. He said that his grandfather had reached the United States as a stowaway in a ship from Trinidad. Brown served in the U.S. Army, serving one tour of duty in South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. According to his former wife, Mandy Sayer, he was discharged on the 14th of December, 1966. He worked as a specialist for the military paper Southern Cross, covering actions and stories, interviewing fellow soldiers, and publishing articles on Vietnamese history, which earned him a Bronze Star. He has since used these experiences as the source of his war poetry collections, Toys in a Field and DNK Dao. Now me, just to briefly pause, I love war poetry. So I'm probably gonna just order this book immediately. The title of which derives from a derogatory term in Vietnamese for American soldiers. So that last title, DNK Dao. Komunyakaa has said that following his return to the United States, he found the American people's rejection of Vietnam veterans to be every bit as painful as the racism he had experienced while growing up in the American South before the Civil Rights Movement. Yes, and I've heard that story before, the nature of the violence and negativity from the anti-war movement, but to make it that equivalent, that's a potent comparison, I'd say, worth inspection for those who thought that stuff was just universally righteous. Kumunyaka collection, the Kumunyaka's collection, copacetic fuses jazz rhythms and syncopation with hip colloquialism and the unique, arresting poetic imagery that has since become his trademark. It also outlines an abiding desire in his work to articulate cultural truths that remain unspoken in daily discourse, in the hope that they will bring a sort of redemption. Quote, how can love heal? The mouth shut this way. Say something that resuscitates us behind the masks. I like his use of masks. I must say, I really do. Kumanyaka's I Apologize for the Eyes in My Head, published in 1986, won the San Francisco Poetry Prize. More attention came with the publication of DNK Dao, Vietnamese for Crazy in the Head, published in 1988. That was the war poem poetry collection previously mentioned, which focused on his experiences in Vietnam and won the Dark Room Poetry Prize. Included was the poem Facing It, in which the speaker of the poems visits the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. In 2004, Kumanyaka began a collaboration with dramaturge and theater producer Chad Gracia on a dramatic adaptation of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Wow, cool. The play was published in October 2006 by Wesleyan University Press. In spring 2008, New York's 92nd Street Y staged a one-night performance by director Robert Scanion. In May 2013, it received a full production by the Constellation Theater Company in Washington, D.C. Kumanyaka's work has influenced many later American poets. He views his own work as an indirectness and insulation. Poetry is a kind of distilled insinuation. Apologies. Poetry is a kind of distilled insinuation. It's a way of expanding and talking around an idea or a question. Sometimes more actually gets said through such a technique than a full frontal assault. Yeah, I'm forced to agree. That's a wonderful take, wonderful perspective, worth revisiting. Kumanyaka married Australian novelist Mandy Sayer in 1985. That year, he was hired as an associated professor at Indiana University in Bloomington. He also held the Ruth Lilly Professorship for 2 years from 1989 to 1990. He and Sayer were married for 10 years. He later had a relationship with an India-born poet, Ritika Vazirani, with whom he had a child. Vazirani died in a murder-suicide. Oh my goodness. Killing their son, Jehan, and herself in 2003. He was 2 years old. Wow, that's a real kick in the pants. Horrifying. Imagine what this sensitive poet must have experienced. Dreadful. Horrifying, in fact. So I like to circle back before I ask David. I have a question to ask him first before we get his take on this poet. What he says here about how he feels his poetry to be an insinuation. Poetry is a kind of distilled insinuation. It's a way of expanding and talking around an idea or a question. Sometimes more actually gets said through such a technique than in a full frontal assault. So what do you think about that concept, David, specifically, that poetry is an insinuation?
I would say that poetry works on a smaller scale than fiction does, and that it works in a way that is quieter. So it works it expresses an essence of what fiction offers in a full a full expression of. So an insinuation is one aspect. So yes, I agree with it. But to me, I boil it down even simpler. It is to poetry is the essence of the experience and the world around us. So um, I guess it's a matter of words. You could say insinuation. Poetry is an insinuation of the world around us. But yeah, that makes sense to me. Um, Now, the way I would diverge is that I believe poetry talks about language and about itself, and in its purest form, and that poetry that talks about ideas or things in the world directly to serve the delivering these ideas and is slightly more indirect. So poetry is not being employed to its fullest extent then.
I see. I see. Very good. Even if it's just to have inspired that little, reflection. Now, what do you think about the poet and what was shared about him?
It's a remarkable life, I think. And he has he has lived outside more than he has inside as a poet, I would say.
Mhm.
He's lived outside in the world, and that his vast experience over a lifetime um, is the kind of thing that is on such a large scale that it's quite a remarkable achievement that he can find some expressions of it in the smaller scale. Because poetry, you have to think of poetry as just being very small scale, particularly modern poetry. Now, there are exceptions in modern poetry, like Portrait of a Convex Mirror by um, I just forgot his name. John Ashbery. I'm sorry, by John Ashbery, which is quite a lengthy poem, but and that's more philosophical. But yeah, I think of poetry as being working on a very small and delicate scale, but in no way is it superior to fiction in expressing human experience.
Mm. Interesting. Um, and the thing about him, the depth of his life, growing up where he did, coming to the discoveries that he did, being in the service, and then jumping from that military newspaper to then becoming this incredible poet. I mean, I want to know more about this dude. It's an amazing situation. And what we get, to me, when we break into the wisdom of it, the what it is we're trying to learn from, like, between the polarity of the poem and the poet, there is wisdom to be found. uh and The way he says poetry is a kind of distilled insinuation, and then when you balance that insinuation by the nature of the poem with the coyote and what I take as the territoriality of the city versus the coyote, nature versus modernity, industrial humanity. And then when we also reflect on the fact that there was a rich ecology that the city annihilated, and the coyote just kind of like wanders into that, and then there's this labyrinth, and it's territoriality. The coyote is insinuating itself into the city. uh so the coyote is like the poetry, and that's really the key, is the focus, the focus that's displayed in poetry. The city is not the focus. The coyote is the focus, and the coyote's sojourning through the city, which is an aberration. It's not going to find what it needs in the city. It's an industrial wasteland. Maybe it can scrounge water. Maybe it can kill a cat or something to eat. So maybe rodents. I don't know. But it may not get its full diet, and it's breathing oily air and everything else. So the contrast in focus, David, is that our wisdom? Is that what poetry is? Because you mentioned how you think poetry, especially modern poetry, it won't be for me to disagree with you either, but modern poetry is built on a smaller scale. Do you think that question of scale is a question of focus?
Depends on what your definition of focus is, I suppose. In no way is fiction less focused than poetry. What it is it's more expansive. It uses more language than poetry does. And it is not as highly metaphorical, typically. So this expansiveness of the coyote is, you want to think how, I should say, I would interpret this poem as that this is a reclaiming of natural habitat by the coyote, and that the city is an artificial construction that has been placed in this habitat. And there, I mean, if you go down to the last stanza, the last couple of stanzas, let's see. Don't try to hide from her kind of blues, or the dead nomads who walk the trails now paved by wanderlust, an epic somewhere between tamed and wild. There is actually, it's earlier up in the poem, was the mention of painted stones is significant because it suggests an artificial nature to the cityscape as opposed to the landscape, or the natural landscape of, and this is New York City, by the way, just so everyone understands. So it's the most popular, one of the most populated and largest cities in America. So, but I wanted to get into a subject, if you can bear some time, is that when we're talking about coyotes, it's a very common thing for coyotes to come into the city. For example, here in Chicago, there's over 4,000 known coyotes living in the city, in the suburbs, and in parks. And I have encountered them myself in the past. So coyotes, the natural world is always trying to reclaim what man has taken from it.
Yep. That is very true. And that issue of naturalization, the creeping green, some people call it. If you read like something like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, there's an emphasis on that towards the end of the book, where the chapel is smothered in and it's being naturalized, basically consumed by the wilderness, which is rushing up like a slow wave around it. And it's like that when it comes to old graveyards out in near ghost towns, or dead places that get completely naturalized and grown over, where trees are growing up, wrapping around gravestones, pulling them almost into the earth, back where they belong. That is a heck of a thing to contemplate. It's its own kind of poetry. It's its own kind of focus. And we'll make a word for it. We'll call it worldscaping. We're worldscaping when we think about the like when we go into the to the poem. Don't try to hide from her kind blues, as you said, the dead nomads, or the dead nomads who walk trails now paved by wanderlust, an epoch somewhere between tamed and wild. So we're talking about the phantoms of Native Americans walking through deer paths that have been obliterated, and now there's a park, and or there's a city, we should say, and then there's the Seneca Village, which is a parallel. You know, that coyote is looking for Seneca Village, and it's in Central Park. It's the same thing. It doesn't realize there are no deer paths, but there were. So the worldscaping is timeless because it takes you back through deep time history, back when things were different. And that journey is a poetic journey. It's an amazing journey. Anytime you could find that stuff. So I think the wisdom is in worldscaping. I think this type of imagery and focus and the insinuation, as this poet says, of this poetry, it's wonderful. It's a delight. It takes us places. It makes us think. It's wonderful. And the way he articulates territoriality, I think that's another thing behind worldscaping, is the nature of territoriality, if it be epochs of time or regions of space. When you wed that sort of thing, you can do all kinds of magical poetic work. So that's something he showed us. That's a bit of wisdom. So remember that, folks, because it's a pretty big deal. David, have you anything else to say about the poem or the poet?
Well, there's a lot more that I could say about it, but I need to manage my time better. So the space that we have for this podcast makes it more practical, I think, at this point to move on.
All right. Well, that's fine. Maybe we'll do another one of his poems, and then there are more things that could be said.
Oh yes, I would be delighted to cover another one of his poems, but part of the reason that I'm choosing not to delve too far into it is because I find that the more I speak about something, the less other people can speak about it. So, as a poet, I'm trying to listen more to what other people say about poems now, and it's been beneficial for me because I already know what I think, but and my interpretation and reading of a poem can be completely different than yours or another reader or listener of this podcast.
Yeah.
And they're all equally valid interpretations.
Sure. Yeah, no.
I mean, I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it's really true, actually.
No, and it's
it's the point of self-discovery. That, I mean, this is when I talk about a poem and a poet, and the minute the poet publishes a poem, it belongs to the people, and not to the poet anymore as much, because it becomes part of a way to express human condition.
Sure. Yeah. So when it boils down to all that stuff, it's like what we're trying to do with this show is we're trying to have an old reading of poesy. Like back in the day, people used to get together and have poetry readings, and sometimes they would have poetry writings where they would be working on something, and people would hear the reading of it and they would give their feedback or criticism. And it's like this type of analysis of both poem and poet. I think it plays a pretty important role in the development of the writer of poetry. And certainly for those who read poetry to appreciate it better. I think it does both. So it's a good thing to listen, to talk. I mean, lamentably, I was unfamiliar with this poet, but now I want to go out, especially the war poetry. I literally can't wait. It's like I read Wilfred Owen, that British poet. He wrote about his experiences in World War I, and it's such an incredible, as we've been talking, an insinuation or a focus or a worldscaping or a territoriality. It's such an incredible thing to be in that position. So we'll have to check that out, or at least I'm gonna. So yeah, folks, this is, again, whenever you're doing something awesome, time flies, you know, and you know, we've reached that point. And it's been a great show. I had a blast, and I feel like I learned something about poesy, and I feel inspired to write. And I hope you do too, as the audience. So JWC is, you know, we're trying to inspire you, but we can't make you a better writer. You have to make yourself a better writer. You have to put in the work and have the discipline or the obsession to reach for mastery. And but what we are trying to do is we're trying to make you a different writer, which is maybe can make all the difference in the world to the effort. Head over, if you like our content, head over to joeswritersclub.com, sign up at joeswriters.club, which is our forums. Check out JWC social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. And most importantly, please head to JWC YouTube. That's Joe's Writers Club YouTube channel for our JWC live stream. Please like and subscribe, and share with any who you think would benefit from the content, any creative you know, or a very bibliophilic reader who likes poesy. Spread the word around, and support underground authors as much as possible, because their creative journey, for some of them, it's their everything. So I try to do the same in my efforts. I want to thank David Anderson for being on the show today. I think we brought a lot of insight when it comes to poesy, and it's a blast. I love doing this show. And we thank you for listening. We want you guys to stay creative, and we'll see you again real soon.